I'd like to take a moment to thank the Blockchain Academy. The Blockchain Academy is an educational training firm offering blockchain training to the enterprise. The Blockchain Academy offers courses for both management and developers, offering delivery online and in live classrooms. The Blockchain Academy works with enterprise clients to create and deliver innovative training programs globally. They recently announced a new blockchain course targeted towards attorneys. To learn more about the Blockchain Academy, visit them at www.theblockchainacademy.com.
This is the Blockchain 360 podcast. Blockchain 360 is a podcast of interviews and discussions about the current state and direction of blockchain. Thank you for joining us today. If this is your first time listening, then thank you for coming. The Blockchain 360 podcast is produced weekly for your enjoyment, and show notes are found at our website, blockchain360.co. Come back often and feel free to add the podcast to your favorite RSS feed or iTunes. You can also follow us on Twitter at Blockchain360. All links discussed today are included in the show notes.
Hi, my name is Brian Nilsson, and I'm your host here on Blockchain 360, where we talk about everything blockchain. My guest today is Alex Mashinsky. He was born into communism, and he was reared under socialism, and is currently thriving under capitalism. He's a prominent entrepreneur who has founded several companies over the years, including Celsius Networks, GroundLink, Transit Wireless, Elmatics, and Arbanet. Alex disrupted several industries, but is most well known as the inventor of voice over IP, or VoIP, which today enables over 1 billion people worldwide to use free voice over the internet for free. His new startup, Celsius Networks, is disrupting the banks. It is a community-based proof-of-stake blockchain protocol allowing members to borrow dollars against their crypto assets and to earn interest when they deposit and lend their crypto out. He wants 7.5 billion people to go from VoIP to MOIP, which is money over IP. His success as an entrepreneur stems from his acute ability to identify future trends, assemble world-class teams, and raise enough money to fund his projects. Two of his companies, Arbanet and Transit Wireless, achieved monolithic hold on their respective industries and pioneered new business models and groundbreaking technologies. He has a long history with high tech, evidenced by his powerful intellectual property portfolio. He has authored over 50 patents that cover everything from VoIP, smart grid, ad exchange, Groupon, Twitter, Skype, App Store, Netflix streaming concept, and many other top-performing web companies. He is one of the leading evangelists of web-based exchanges. Alex, welcome to the Blockchain 360.
Thanks for having us.
Now, you have a very interesting background. Can you fill in more about this? I mean, you were born into communism, reared in socialism, and now you're here in capitalism.
Well, I tried all three systems, and they all have advantages and disadvantages. I can tell you that having lived in the U.S. for 30 years, capitalism is not a perfect system as well. Even though I'm part of that 1%, seeing that, basically 1/10 of 1% of families in the U.S., about 33,000 people
Right.
have the same wealth as 90% of the bottom of the population. Doesn't work for me. And part of what I'm doing with Celsius is really to try to do something about that. So I think, the blockchain decentralization are a fourth system. And that's really, you have to think about it in those terms, that it's something.
What do you mean? Explain that so that the listeners have an ability to understand. You said a fourth system. So what are the first three?
Communism is a system in which everybody's treated exactly the same. So in theory, but when I was born and grew up in Russia, in the USSR, in the Ukraine in this case, the guy cleaning the street and the most admired professor were earning the same amount of money, which was about 120 rubles. So because a communist
Right.
system treated everybody with the same
Equally,
level.
right.
It didn't matter what you earned. It was about what do you contribute to society. So the pride of being a professor at the top university was more important than how much you made. And socialism is more about a safety net, right? It's about making sure that no one falls through the cracks and is left behind. And the safety net kind of collects everybody and keeps everybody in the same group, in the same heart, right? And capitalism is a completely different system. In capitalism, the few mavericks are effectively generating all of the value on behalf of the entire community, but the people who are not doing so well in that community are left behind, and the society does not take care of them. So, and that's what we're seeing. Like, again, in the US, it's an amazing country. It's an amazing place for people like me who have a new idea every day, but it's not such a great place for the tens of millions of people who are struggling to finish their month, and they have less than $500 in case of emergency.
Right. Any major catastrophic issue would cause them to almost be bankrupt.
Fall out of society, yes.
Right. But you actually then say that blockchain is now this new platform.
So the reason I'm saying that is because most people don't realize that, for example, Ethereum, this tiny little thing that most people don't even know what it is, the blockchain called Ethereum, created more millionaires than any public company in history.
Seriously?
Seriously. And it's very simple, because in most, I've
been in this space for quite a number of years, and this is the first time I've ever even heard that.
Well, let me explain. So almost every public company, if you look at its original set of investors, you will find out that almost every one of them, in many cases all of them, are millionaires already.
Correct.
So because it's originated by a founder, and then there's a bunch of venture capitalists or investors who come in who are all either institutions or private investors who are extremely wealthy. Then they grow the company, then they take it public, and the average Joe gets to participate. For example, in Facebook, when did the average Joe get to participate? Only after it went public and was worth over $100 billion. So in Ethereum, as an example, the average person was allowed to come to the pre-sale and the sale, the ICO itself, and it didn't matter if they were accredited investor or not accredited. They could have bought whatever they wanted, and they could have become a miner and become part of the community through that. And none of those, it didn't matter if you were uneducated, a guy that didn't finish high school. So the way our society and the SEC and other institutions are protecting the innocent, protecting the people who are not allowed to participate, in a way is also making sure that they're not breaking through the ceiling and creating wealth for themselves.
So you almost would argue that the SEC is not protecting the underclass, it's actually protecting the privileged class.
I think the SEC is protecting the status quo, and you could say that they're protecting the grandma from Iowa from buying an ICO and losing all her money. I can understand that argument, and I agree with it. But I think that it's also, in most cases, preventing over 90% of the population from having even an opportunity to participate in the wealth creation of this nation.
Now, I want to go back into your background here a little bit and talk about your role in creating voice over IP. So can you share with me a little about this? So, because I'm not sure everyone always knows who you are. I mean, this is part of who you are. So, I mean, this is important for everyone to know.
It's more about being in the right place at the right time. I was lucky enough to, again, come to this country as an immigrant. And one of the first things I got involved with was I looked at PCs and I was like, this is an amazing thing, because before that, everything you worked with was mainframe or mini computers. And I think my first computer was an 8088 processor with a 8-bit slot from AT&T. AT&T used to make computers.
No, I know. I had one.
Oh, that's amazing. So that was my first kind of machine, right? It was very slow. It barely had any memory. And it had like 2 cards inside of it. It had a CPU card and a video port, and that's the only thing that the computer had inside. Right. But you could go and buy different boards and put them inside the computer. I'm talking about 88, 89.
Right.
So that was a revolution, the ability to basically take this device. And I've tinkered my entire life with electronics and built all kind of different systems. I hacked into the. I'll give you a quick story just because I think it's going to make your viewers understand. So I was a teenager. I was, I think, a 14 or 14 and a half, and I had this really amazing looking neighbor who lived right across the hall from me, and she was like 16. She didn't want anything to do with me. I was like a baby, So I decided to hack the phone company in Israel and program her phone to ring where my phone to ring where her phone rang. And I thought that was just something that because if I learn about her, maybe she'll pay any attention to me. And the police and the phone company eventually figured out who managed to hack into their system, and they showed up in my apartment and confiscated all my equipment. And and the guy said, the only reason we're not completely terminating your phone line forever is because your father is a doctor and he needs that phone for emergencies. So we're gonna leave it there. So my point is that I tinkered with electronics since I can remember. And when I saw that PC, I realized that is a revolution. We can do amazing things with it. And one of the first things I built was the PC-based voicemail systems. So me and my partner worked in a company called A+ Systems, and we built basically one of the first PC-based voicemail system where back when Octel and VMX were running on mini computers with proprietary hardware, and it cost over $100,000 to have a voicemail system. And the big companies bragged about it. Here we have. And we basically created one for less than $10,000 and sold it to a variety of different...
What was the name of that company?
A+ Systems.
A+. Actually,
and VoiceSmart.
I had an A+ system for my business at that time.
Yes, so we sold it to a bunch of different PBX manufacturers.
Right. Sure, yeah.
Who put it behind their PBX, and they basically, they had hundreds of thousands of installations all over the country. Companies like, wow, now you're really testing my memory. Anyway, I'll remember later. But that was kind of the foundation. So I had this system that could interact with phone lines, but it was mostly input-output. And I looked at the internet as just as this hobby, right? You dial up a BBS and you'll check your email and talk about early 90s.
Sure.
And it dawned on me that basically that network is going to become much bigger than the phone network. And back then, the entire internet ran on the phone network.
It did, I know.
You wanted to access anything, you used your phone with the modem to dial up a server. And I realized that, that everything is going to be always on. It's going to be high-speed lines. And because of that, the voice network, the phone network, the most powerful... irrelevant. Well, they will become an application on the data network. Yes. That was the breakout moment. And that was like 93, that it dawned on me that, hey, voice is just an application on the internet.
Right.
And it took me like a year to figure out how to make that work, what boards I can use. So I use the Dialogic boards for the voice processing. I use Analogic board for the DSPs because Dialogic wasn't powerful enough to process voice in real time, and basically combine those together to be able to take inputs either through analog or digital lines, convert it into IP, put it on the backbone. And back then, getting the backbone was impossible, right?
Right.
Getting a T1 internet connection was tens of thousands of dollars a month. And I built two of these things and two gateways, right? And I had no clue who needs them. It was just like one of those things where you hope that you'll build it and they will come. And luckily for me, AT&T just at the same time, because of instructions from the State Department, was looking to balance the trade, the settlement, voice settlement trade with foreign countries.
Oh, interesting.
So the U.S. was paying something like $6 billion in outbound payments per year. Back then, that was big money. Again, 94, 95. $6 billion
is still big money. So.
No, but back then, that was like
huge money.
Huge money, right? I mean, this is... and so basically, for example, with Japan, KDDI was the monopoly on the other side. AT&T was a monopoly on our side. And because there were 3 times as many calls from U.S. to Japan as from Japan to the U.S. had to pay settlement because of the excess traffic between because usually the two net off transaction, but when there was too many calls, so basically
it was an imbalance.
It was an imbalance, exactly. So just like there's an imbalance in trade today with China, back then there was an imbalance with voice calls, and that was the big fight. So AT&T went to Bell Labs and said to Bell Labs, hey, can you build us anything to create an alternative to this traditional settlement system. And they worked on it for over a year. And by the way, there are a few people who are bragging out there, Bell Labs people who are bragging about them creating voice over IP. So I'm just putting the record straight that they did not deliver.
They didn't deliver.
They did not deliver. They worked on it, but they did not deliver. And AT&T chose this tiny little company. Back then it was called SmartNet, because before I changed the name to Arbinet, I called it SmartNet, and I didn't do any checks on trademark or whatever. And Cisco had a network called SmartNet. So I have a contract, so I still have it. The contract signed with AT&T of them ordering a few nodes that we deployed in Japan and Korea and Australia and a bunch of other places. And those were the first few nodes that we deployed because Bell Labs didn't deliver.
Interesting.
And the rest is history. So the funny story to that is that AT&T gave me, I think it was a 45 megabit connection, which was almost I think the internet backbone was 155 megabit back then.
Right.
And to run the
which
service,
is what they call it a C3.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, T3.
Or T3, right?
Yes. So what? No, you're right. It's no, a T1 was just a T1, and the T3 was a 45 megabit, and then there was something else that's 155. I have to look it up. I don't remember. But anyway, so I had this. I was like one of the very few people
who had that
in New York who had that level of connection, and that was to run all of that alternate voice. So we basically we were in Tokyo. We were connected to NTT directly to terminate calls in Osaka and a few other places. And then it ran over ATT gens over the internet to New York, and they
got split out.
And then I had T1s coming in from all the different.
Was this down on Hudson Street?
It was. It should have been but our deployment was on. We were on 54th Street, so we were on. What was the address? I think it's like 212 East 54th Street. Like that was it's a non-district building. You would never know. But we had a lot of fiber in that building, and we put all the systems. And it's funny because there was a disco on the basement of the building. I was on the second floor, and I had a team from Japan, from ATT Gens, comes to do the inspection and everything else to make sure everything worked. And these Japanese guys work around the clock, right? So it's like 9 p.m. and we're still testing everything. And then the guys in the club turn on the music, and the whole floor starts shaking. And they look at me and they're like, "What is all of this?" And I'm like, "That's our earthquake test." And they were laughing. I finally got the Japanese to crack because, they were so serious and that we were at very tight deadlines. But we turned on the service. And the next day it was front news in the New York Times that AT&T bypasses KDDI with blah, 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 offering direct service to U.S. customers. And they just used that to lower the settlement rate.
Right, sure.
From $3 a minute to something like $1.50 a minute, and so
which was a substantial savings.
Exactly, and then eventually now it's down to like a fraction of a penny,
if that. I mean,
yes,
I remember absolutely having huge long distance bills for my business.
Yes,
and that would be just out of this specific area code.
Yes.
I'm like, and I remember when I finally got it down to like 12 cents a minute, I was like, wow, this is really cheap. And now
exactly. So AT&T loved it, and they basically were telling me, look, we love what you're doing, just don't give it to everybody else, okay? We want it for ourselves. This beautiful voice over IP thing that you created. And by the way, there were other companies working on things. Like there was a company called VocalTech out of Israel. They did Ethernet-based, not internet-based, but Ethernet-based communication. So they had a gateway that worked on your LAN network and allowed you with your connector to basically replace the PBX with phones that worked on the same LAN that you already have.
Wow.
But we actually figured out how to take SS7 and C7 signaling and convert any voice communication on any network to go and connect to any other voice communication on any other network. And back then there was no cellular service. I mean, there was all landlines everywhere.
Right.
So we had interfaces, like each country has its own unique interface. Like the T1 in Japan is not the same T1 in the United States. You need a different standard, different permit. So it's very similar to what's happening now with money over IP, where
exactly.
every country you need a different permit and a different this and different. So that was my training ground. Is fighting the phone companies was my training ground. Fighting the banks. That's like going from the junior league to the pros, because the banks are definitely the fight of my life. So, but look, everything I've done is not new, right? My job in life is to disrupt the monopolies and bring these innovations to the people. And like you said, 1 billion people use it every day. 3.5 billion people use VoIP in total, have VoIP on their phones.
Right.
What shocks me is why the other 3 billion don't use it. Like, why 3 billion people insist on paying their phone company every month?
Right. Well, that's true. So what made you decide to go from voice over IP to blockchain? I mean, what was that transition for you?
It took me a while. I would lie if I tell you that the first time I saw the blockchain, I immediately realized its power, right? I mean, I'm an efficiency guy. Like, for me, looking at taking voice and putting it on the internet and using TCP/IP and UDP protocols to transmit it, that was a 10 times more efficient model, right? Because you use the circuits, instead of having TDM, time division multiplexing, and having a dedicated circuit for each channel, here you use the entire bandwidth for everybody.
At all times.
So it was 10, maybe 100 times more efficient model. It had its own issues. We're still struggling with voice quality issues 20 years later, but overall, it was very easy for me to comprehend that this new network that is asynchronous and that is this, again, a shared pipe is going to be the future network. When I saw, and the guy that introduced me to Bitcoin is, I'm having lunch with him tomorrow. So in 2009, I think, he reached out to me with Satoshi's paper, and I looked at it and I said, because we used to work together, and I was like, this is too slow. Like, it requires so much electricity, this proof of work thing.
Right, I know.
It's not going to scale. It's so inefficient, right? It's like
totally inefficient.
It is, and the thing that most people don't understand is that TCP/IP runs faster and faster and faster the more nodes you add to it.
Right.
If you have 2 nodes, it's not that fast. But you have 1,000 nodes, it's perfect, right? You can chop half of the network and everything still works.
Right.
But the blockchain is exactly the opposite. You put a blockchain with 2 nodes and it's lightning fast. You start adding node and it slows down to a crawl.
That's because of the replication.
Exactly. So we all understand why, but when you think about putting applications on the blockchain, you very quickly realize that most applications do not belong on the blockchain. So it's only very good for very, very few things. And the first time I looked at it, I had a hard time realizing, okay, what is that killer app? Well, guess what? It's the Bitcoin is 10 years old, and we're still struggling to figure out what is the killer app, right?
Absolutely.
Shipping coins to each other is not necessarily a killer app.
No, absolutely not. I would like to take a moment to thank one of our sponsors, the Blockchain Academy. The Blockchain Academy is an educational training firm offering blockchain training for developers and stakeholders. The Blockchain Academy is currently offering the following live courses: Blockchain Security, Hyperledger Developer Workshop, and Ethereum 0 to D app. Visit the Blockchain Academy's website for course outlines and course dates. The Blockchain Academy's courses can be delivered as a company-specific training, tailor-made to fit your organizational needs, delivered both on-site and online. The Blockchain Academy's training is cost-effective, flexible, and can be conducted in a manner that best suits your organizational needs. To learn more about the Blockchain Academy, visit them at www.theblockchainacademy.com. This brings us to your money over IP. So you went from voice over IP to money over IP. So
it's a very simple idea.
That's the transition.
Yes. It's a very simple idea. I mean, I've been holding coins since 2013, Bitcoin.
Sure.
Then I bought a little bit of Ethereum and so on. But what dawned on me, and this was, I think, in 2016, what dawned on me was that the main opportunity of decentralization, and I'll talk about the blockchain in a second, but basically decentralization is just like a giant tsunami that is washing the entire planet. It's a movement.
Sure.
It's like, just like Christianity is a movement, is a religion. This is a religion. It's people people in their minds are looking at their lives and saying, no, this idea that a few of us, a select few of us, get to accumulate wealth our entire life, and that towards the end of our life we somehow have this moment where we decide to give it all back, and we become these benevolent people who are sprinkling wealth on everybody else,
right,
is just a crazy idea. And the wealth concentration has never been higher than it is today in history.
Right, that's
you
true.
Look at the Roman Empire. You look at the guys with the guillotine in France. The day before the revolution, the wealth concentration in France was not as bad as it is now in the United States and other countries. So really, we are kidding ourselves if we're thinking that somehow we can continue creating more and more concentration and squeeze more and more out of the population and not have any consequences.
Right.
So again, as a student, I lived through communism. Right? Communism was a revolution that came and said, hey, this Tsar guy, the guy that has all the wealth in Russia, we're just going to chop everybody's heads off, and we're going to redistribute everything to everybody, and everything is going to be wonderful. And that didn't work out. Socialism didn't work out too well for everybody. And capitalism, we realize, has its own flaws, right? So and you mentioned in the early description of my bio, both ARBANET and Transit Wireless achieved the monopoly states, meaning ARBANET basically had, I think, close to 90% of all the trading in voice. At one point, it had 10% of all the traffic in the world running through our networks. So we were effectively a monopoly for trading in voice and data capacity. Yeah. And Transit Wireless is the monopoly in the subways. So right, you cannot use if you're a carrier, AT&T, Verizon, Sprint, you cannot use that service unless you contracted. In this case, it's a good monopoly.
It is a good monopoly.
It's giving a service for free to the user, and it's charging a lot of money to the carriers. They hate my guts because they lost. I made them lose twice to this guy called Mashinsky. They usually don't lose. They're not used to losing anything.
Right.
So the joke is that monopoly is a horrible thing unless you own one. When you own one, it's a good thing. It's a wonderful thing. Yes. So here, what we're really creating is more and more monopoly. I mean, Google is a monopoly. Facebook is a monopoly, right? Most of the companies, Amazon is almost a monopoly.
Almost, yeah.
So my point is that in the internet age, it's much easier to get a monopoly, and the banks are not operating like a monopoly. So
why do you say that?
Well, because if you look at, we had tens of thousands of banks in the 30s, and now we're down to like 5 banks. I think the 5 largest banks have more than half of all the deposits and all the capital in the United States, right, under management. So I think JP Morgan is something like 23 trillion in assets under management. I mean, just like a crazy number, right? Most of us don't even know how many zeros that is. So I think the issue is that when all companies, I remember AT&T as a monopoly, right? When they ran all the international voice service, and MCI maybe 1% of the traffic, but
MCI was just a Midwest firm that did nothing. I mean, they just were serving the rural.
Yeah, they were a microwave operator for trucking companies, but so AT&T as a monopoly was just this arrogant, monolithic company that couldn't do anything right. Yet it was the most profitable company in America at the time, right? 94, 93. So
no, I think that was 83. I think
83.
I think they broke up January 1.
But even after the breakout, they were still one of the most profitable companies in America.
Well, the 7 bells, the baby bells were still huge.
But they had all the international voice. So they had
AT&T kept that.
AT&T, yes. AT&T kept that. And the profit on international voice, they charged you $3 a minute, but their cost was a few pennies.
Right.
So the profit margin was like in the 90-something% level, right? So it was tremendous. It was just ridiculous, right? Kind of, again, the same profit margin that you're seeing right now with Google and Facebook and so on. And they would never think that monopoly somehow is going to disappear. So going back to, again, the blockchain and decentralization, today we have an opportunity. The mass population is basically saying enough is enough, and we need to replace all these monopolies with things and systems that act in our best interest, which sounds ridiculous. I mean, like, well, I remember Google. I met Sergey Brin when he had no employees. It was just him
Wow.
and what's his name? And their motto was "Do no evil." When was the last time you heard Google talk about "Do no evil"?
No. They abandoned it 3 or 4 years ago.
Exactly. So my point is that most companies, even the ones who have good intentions, unfortunately end up having to deliver more and more profit for their shareholders, because Wall Street is really. I have 6 kids at home, and I can tell you that Wall Street is more crybaby than any of my kids, because you make any mistake or you give too much to your customers, and all the analysts and all the investors on Wall Street start crying like crazy and threatening to sell your shares, and your price goes down, and you have to basically renege on doing anything for your customers because you have to give more and more profit to these guys who are just crybabies and want to squeeze even more out of the system.
Right.
So, and when you have to squeeze all this profit out of the system, you cannot act in the best interest of your customers or your depositors in the case of banks.
Right. So this brings you, though, to the creation of Celsius Network.
Right. So looking at decentralization, looking at the blockchain, looking at Bitcoin, Ethereum, I said, well, what if we created an organization that always acted in the best interest of the depositor, never in the best interest of the borrower or the shareholder or the big lenders who usually, or the investors who usually run these companies, right, or control these companies. And if we created that, and most people stopped depositing their money with banks and deposited their money with these institutions that are acting in their best interest, then we really have an opportunity to take the power away from the banks, because most people don't realize that, but all the power banks have is because all of us makes deposits with them.
That's right.
If we stop depositing money there, they will have to sell all the buildings downtown and sell the private planes and stop taking these fancy vacations.
The horror of that.
The horror of that, exactly. And if we deposit in the community that acts in our best interest, we will earn more, and it will cost us less to take loans, right? So, and again, just as a simple analogy, right? You get your paycheck, you deposit it in the bank. The bank usually don't pay you anything for it unless you remember to move it to a savings account.
Right. No,
and then it's
0.
1% or less.
Right.
And if you lock it for 2 years, maybe they'll give you 2%. And then they turn around and they lend me your money. It's not their money. It's your money that they lend me. We may be neighbors living on the same floor.
Exactly.
And they're reintroducing us to each other, and they charge me 25% on average. In the United States, 25% on the credit card. So they pay you 1% at best. They charge me 25%. They make 24 out of 25%. That's a 95% margin on your money. So if your real estate broker came and when you wanted to sell your house said, I'm going to keep 95% of the value of the house, you would either fire them or put them in an asylum, right? Because it would be like crazy.
No one would do that.
No one would do that. How about your broker, your stockbroker, or your insurance broker, anyone else? But somehow every day, all of us, almost the entire population in America, gives all of our money to banks and let them get away with keeping 90 to 95% of the value.
Right.
And we think that that's just the norm. When I came to this country, I deposited money with Citibank, and I was paid over 8% on just straight deposits.
Wow.
You know, that was just walking into the bank, putting a few $1,000s in, 8%, 8.25%, and so on. 1988, I think it was, 89.
No, I think that would have probably been earlier, like
Earlier.
early 80s.
So, and that was just like the norm, right?
Right.
And since then, all we've seen is a continuous decrease in the amount that we paid. And it's because we had to bail out the banks.
Right.
The reason the rates are so low is because the Fed had to reflate the economy in order to recapitalize the banks, right?
Well, they needed to create a way so that the banks could have access to capital without it costing them anything.
Right, which reducing the rates to 0 and allowing the banks to continue charging 25%. The problem is now the banks are more recapitalized than ever, but the rate is not going back to that 6, 7, 8%. It's staying at almost 0, right? Net, if you take inflation and offset it with what the Fed is charging, you actually have still negative rates, right? The inflation is probably higher than what the Fed rate is. So my point is that unfortunately, the Fed is not acting in the best interest of the depositors. The banks are not acting in the best interest of the depositors. The government is not acting in the best interest of the depositors. So we have to create something that looks like Costco. Okay, I stole the idea from Costco, where we can have a membership organization where we just pay a membership, and when we walk into that warehouse, everything is at the best price. We don't need to check the orange juice or the toilet paper or whatever else they're selling us. We know that every employee in Costco did everything they could to deliver the best price in our best interest, us, the community.
Correct.
Right? Why? Because we're paying that membership fee, and that's their entire income. So Celsius will build under the exactly same model. Idea. It's just that instead of a warehouse full of products, we have a warehouse full of financial products. Because that's the only thing we're offering is financial products that are acting in your best interest.
Now, are people depositing then with you cryptocurrencies or real money?
We only accept cryptocurrencies.
All right, so they have to deposit that with you.
So part of
what do you call those depositors? Do you call them depositors?
Yes, they're depositors. They just have crypto money, which most banks think is like funny money. It's like monopoly money, and it's fine.
JP Morgan did until last week, so
yes, but we'll get to that in a minute. But the for a variety of regulatory reasons, we obviously do not want to be a bank. We don't want to be covered under all the regulatory requirements and licensing and everything else. And lucky for us, again, the SEC and other people have decided that Bitcoin and Ethereum are not security,
right,
and that they're not a currency. So they categorize them as a commodity.
Right.
And there's no problem with depositing, at least according to my lawyers. I have 3 different set of lawyers. And there's no problem with depositing digital currencies in a wallet and paying interest in kind, meaning in the same coin.
Right. So if I deposited Ethereum, I'm getting paid back in Ethereum.
If you gave me sugar and I gave you a little bit more sugar when you withdrew it, that's exactly what we do.
It's a commodity.
It's a commodity. We're just, in this case, using Bitcoin or Ethereum instead of sugar or aluminum.
Right.
So what we're saying is that in the world where real dollars are not earning you anything, and the dollar is an inflationary currency. Every year, we print trillions of extra dollars. We want it, we don't want it, doesn't matter. Like the government just printed, when they gave the tax break, effectively printed 1.7 trillion new dollars,
right?
Which basically diluted everybody by who knows how much. And our national debt is increasing by $1 trillion or more every year.
22 trillion recently.
22 trillion already. So basically, when people ask what's behind the dollar, they don't realize it's not just not worth $100, not worth $100. There's 28 trillion worth of debt behind it, because you have about 7 trillion worth of debt just from all the wars that is off balance sheet.
Right.
And you have and forget about the 70 or 80 trillion worth of liabilities in Medicare and Medicaid.
Oh, unfunded, totally unfunded.
Exactly. So all in, you're over $100 trillion worth of debt behind the dollar. So people say, okay, I'm not going to deposit money in this funny money called Bitcoin, but I'm very confident that if I go to a bank and I put real money, real dollars in a bank, they will be there and nothing will happen to those dollars. And behind every Bitcoin, there is real dollars that were deposited there. There's
originally, right?
Even now.
Well, no.
Every day, Bitcoin
the
trades.
miners themselves, I mean,
they pay the electricity.
They have to pay for electricity. They have to pay for their mining equipment and facilities.
The cost of production is $6,000 today on average.
Right.
So it's trading below par.
Right.
Meaning...
people are losing.
I know, but for every Bitcoin in the last 2 years or 3 years that was produced, it had more or less the same cost on average, right? So it's trading below cost of production. And you can say it's real, it's not real, it's a fake coin. What if everybody leaves tomorrow? Of course, it's going to go down to zero.
Well, the same would be true for any currency.
Exactly. But if you plot the dollar against the Bitcoin over 10 years, since the Bitcoin was created, the dollar lost 99.9% of its value against the Bitcoin.
Right.
After this decrease of 80%.
Right.
because it started at zero. By definition, it's lost almost all of its value.
Right.
So my point is just that I'm not telling people, your listeners, to take all their dollars and withdraw them from the bank and wear a yellow vest and,
we'd
and
have to
burn
move to
down
France,
the money.
though.
Exactly. And that's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that anyone who has a diversified portfolio should keep 5 or 10% of their assets in a non-correlated asset. And the only non-correlated asset that exists today is cryptocurrencies, because everything else, the VIX, the gold, you call any commodity, they're all denominated in dollars,
Right?
And they move with the dollar. So if
That
you
they
want to
do.
be, so if you want to have any kind of a chance of being have protection for yourself, you need to have a non-correlated asset.
Interesting. So when you started thinking about creating Celsius, what was the tripping point that made you say, aha, and that's what I'm going to do?
So it was MOIP, right? Money over IP. And basically, again, it's not a new idea. I worked on moving money as an attachment to email in 2002. I had a startup that tried to do that. And the regulators called us and said, you want to do what again? You want to move money using emails? No, that's just not going to happen. Okay. And they shut us down. So, and obviously there were, Milton Friedman in the famous 1999 interview is calling e-money digital money. And he's saying, in the future, the internet is going to have its own currency and it's going to run. He just didn't know it was called Bitcoin. It was 10 years before Bitcoin. But, we had predictions of this for many, many years.
Right.
It's just that the way the digital internet works, when I send you a copy of my cat, I get to keep the original and you get to keep the copy, right? And I can replicate that 1 million times.
That's
and
correct.
Everybody's happy. But with money, the double spend problem is a fundamental problem that is extremely difficult to solve because of the digital age.
Right.
Because the digital age, you cannot really control who has the original and who has a copy. Because when I send you that cat photo, you can say, hey, I have the original and you kept the copy.
Right.
Right? Everything is the original. So today we live in a world where we don't know what's real, what's not, fake news, real news, fake identities, real identities. So it got to the point where figuring out what is an original, figure out what is unique, requires its own infrastructure.
Right.
And most people don't realize, but the blockchain is not connected to the internet. It's a completely separate network. There are bridges between the internet but most people think it's an internet application. Most people who are not technical enough.
Right.
But really, it's a completely different universe, just like the internet was a completely separate universe that used the phone network, the TDM network,
Right.
and eventually completely absorbed the TDM network. There's no TDM running on the internet today.
Right.
And so just like the voice became an application on the internet, what I'm claiming that because the blockchain is going to be 1 million times bigger than the internet, it requires that processing power and everything else. The entire internet is just going to be an application on the blockchain. We may have to wait 20 years to see that, but I've seen this movie before, so I'm predicting that that's what's going to happen. And the reason for that is that the most powerful and fastest network always wins. And today, the internet does not really need quantum computing. But the blockchain definitely needs quantum computing.
Absolutely needs it.
So if you want the fastest processors and the fastest memory and the fastest quantum bit computers, all of those are going to go on to run the fastest blockchain. And that fastest blockchain is just going to be like a black hole absorbing every application possible, including the entire internet. Because we want to know what's an original and what's not. We want to know if something is real news or fake news. We want to know when you're doing something on the internet, are you the real person or you're a fake person doing it?
Right.
And that would require a blockchain implementation. So
do you think that that blockchain exists now?
Definitely not. That's why I don't think that the winners, I said that many times in the last 10 years, that in my view, the winner in this category is not going to be any of the players today. It's going to be a whole new implementation by somebody brilliant who comes up with
the Alchemy network. They've actually come out with a blockchain that does 10 million transactions per second. So
speed, look, this is not a speed issue because, like, I think Vitalik said that several times that, and I give him credit. He's smart enough to have not slowed down Ethereum to 10 transactions a second because he doesn't understand. If you have a fast network, a really fast network, that means you compromised on either consensus or on the number of nodes you have on the network. So there's no issue running speed. Again, if we have 2 nodes, I can run 1 million transactions a second, right? So your smartphone in your pocket can run 1 million transactions a second. So running 1 node and making consensus all by itself. So the issue is really about how do you achieve unbreakable consensus and at the same time have speed? And the balance of the two is the challenge, right? So that's why you need much better encryption, much faster networks, and you gain speed without compromising on the consensus versus all these quasi-solutions that go to master nodes and subnets and so on, which create really an overlay that makes the decisions for you. And you don't know if that overlay is real consensus or it's dominated by a few Russian guys who make the decision for you. So I think the Bitcoin model, the Ethereum model are definitely, in my view, the winning models.
At this point,
but they are not scalable as to the point where you can really take killer apps from the internet and move them to the blockchain.
Do you see any of them on the horizon? Any of the, like EOS? I mean, EOS seems to be making a lot of claims in terms of what it can do.
Well, look at what we're doing. So the reason Celsius network does not need the next big blockchain is because we pay interest once a week. So even if we had everybody on the planet work with us, give us their deposits, and then once a week we had to pay them interest, the speeds today of Ethereum and Bitcoin are fast enough to do that application.
Sure.
So the applications that I think are going to migrate are not the ones that require 1 billion transactions a second, like real-time advertising or all kind of real-time trading on Wall Street or anything like that. It's going to be actually low-tech, simple application for which consensus is the most important thing.
Correct.
Not speed. And savings and loans are not speed. They're all about, okay, are you distributing? For us, it's just like Yogi Berra says, you see a fork in the road, you got to pick, you got to pick your choose. So we just chose to go left instead of right.
Right.
Instead of giving all the value from the loans to the shareholders and the institutions, we're giving it to the depositors. And people look at me and say, but Alex, why are you giving them so much? You're giving the depositors 80% of what you make. We're used to keeping 80 or 90% of what we make. Right. You're ruining our business. And I'm telling them that if I don't do it, somebody else is going to come and do it, because that's how it was supposed to be in the first place.
Correct.
Just like with VOIP, there was no reason to charge $3 a minute. It should have been almost free, and it is almost free today.
Right.
So I'm just doing what this tsunami of decentralization is going to do anyway. I'm just carrying the flag way ahead of everybody, and I'm probably going to have a lot of arrows in my back. But I'm just running a little bit faster than everybody else.
So how many depositors do you have now?
So we have just over 50,000 downloads of the app. You can only deposit through our app.
Okay.
Because the apps are much more secure than websites or any other mechanism.
Exactly.
So there's much less spoofing and all kind of other crazy things that you can do with the internet these days. We have 50,000 downloads. I would say probably half of them are Android and half of them are Apple. And about 22 or 23,000 people have registered and said, here's my identity. Because we require KYC ML. We require you to give us a driving license. We want to make sure that every participant in that Costco membership is a good actor.
Right.
So we put actually big barriers deterring all the scammers and all the other people. And people try. People give us fake passports and fake driving licenses because they try to get in and earn interest without paying taxes and all kind of other stuff. And we just don't play these games. I mean, if you want to build an institution that's going to have several hundred million people in it, You're not going to start like the blockchain. And remember, the Bitcoin started as effectively a nefarious organization, right? The guys that stole the baton from Satoshi were all anarchists. They looked at this Bitcoin thing and said, they read the white paper, and unlike me, and said, it's inefficient and it's slow and whatever. They said, we can blow up the whole world with this thing. We can make every drug trade and weapon trade and anything we need using this baton, right? They barely got 1 million people to join them all over the world, and they had to pass the baton to the libertarians. The libertarians took the same baton that Satoshi created, looked at it and said, we're going to save the world. This is the best creation ever. We're going to do good. We're going to empower all the poor people on the planet. We're going to do everything, blah, 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 blah. And 3 years later, they barely had 3 million people using it.
Well,
barely.
That's Roger Ver, who's the chief evangelist of that. I've actually
exactly, and I'm a libertarian myself. I'm one of the guys that carried that flag, and I'm a frustrated capitalist libertarian, if there is such a thing exists. But so now you're up to 4 million users. You're probably like 2015. The price of Bitcoin is probably a few $100s.
Right.
And they have to hand off the baton. Who do they hand off the baton to? The capitalists, all the speculators, right? The speculators show up, they take the same baton, and they look at these two other guys and say, you guys couldn't finish the race because you guys don't understand. It's not about blowing up the world. It's not about saving the world. It's just about making money. So we're going to take this baton and we're going to run Bitcoin from a few $100s to $20,000. Why? Because we know who's the last guy on this race. We know who we can hand off the baton to, which is the institutions. This is the first time in history that a new asset class was created, and the institutions were not the first guys in on the next big thing.
Right, they're actually the last.
They're the last, exactly. So the speculators said, we're going to run this thing up as fast as we can, and we're going to hand off this hot baton to the next guys, and they're going to run it up to $1 million from there. But we're going to make our money, we're going to retire, and we're going to live happily ever after. The problem is that the institutions look at the baton and said, too hot, and they dropped the baton, right? And the price went down 90%. Why? The regulatory clearance wasn't there, the scalability wasn't there, the security wasn't there. And it's not that they didn't want the baton. Believe me, Fidelity, everybody else wanted the baton. I've been talking.
Fidelity even opened up a mining operation.
Yes, they've had it for several years.
Yeah.
I've been to their labs. I've seen the operation.
Same thing for Vanguard.
Yes,
they did exactly the same thing.
So, but they could not risk their franchise, which is worth hundreds of billions of dollars, for this little experiment called a Bitcoin or Ethereum or anything else. So that handoff just didn't happen. But at the same time, 2018, that the handoff failed and the baton just fell down, and we didn't finish the race. The number of absolute people to join the blockchain, this is a Bloomberg article that came out in January, more than doubled.
Year, 2019.
January 2019, Bloomberg wrote an article. They did a very extensive survey, and they said more people joined the blockchain in 2018 than the previous 10 years put together.
Oh, wow.
So the adoption from a user standpoint is a hockey stick.
Right.
But the price action is completely uncorrelated.
Right.
And that's why I'm a big believer that this is an overreaction. Just like we overreacted to the 20,000, we're overreacting to the downside, where with Bitcoin hitting 3,300, Ethereum hitting $84.
Right.
Right. So that is just an unsustainable overreaction of all of these speculators, basically empty pocketed, running to the airport to try to leave crypto land as fast as possible back to fiat land.
Right.
Right. Then the next flight, I don't care how much it costs, I'm getting on the next plane. I'm dumping all my coins. I'm out of here. I'm never touching the stuff again. So us recycling people in the adoption curve and not crossing the chasm.
Sure.
Right. Not being able to make it to the next step of adoption is why we're stuck here. I mean, when the internet was 10 years old, it had hundreds of millions of users, close to 500 million users after the Netscape moment, right? We're 10 years old. We barely have 25 million users, active wallets, right? So we are 20x behind where the internet was. right? And when you ask yourself why, it's because we did not give these users a viable product that they can use that is doing good for them, right? Again, speculation is not a long-term viable
plan.
Right. Libertarians doing saving the world is not it's great if you want to run a nonprofit.
Right.
But when you're trying to create a new revolution, you need something much more basic. And the reason I chose lending and borrowing is because there's no person on this planet who wants to save and earn more and who wants to borrow and pay less.
Right.
So it applies to every person on this planet. So the question is just, where do you execute? Where do you start? What the product looks like? How do you bring millions of people to use it? And then you use that to subsidize the service for everybody else.
All right. So you've said that you've had 50,000 downloads of the application. Roughly half those people have created wallets.
We have a few thousand depositors.
Okay.
We have just over 50 million in deposits.
And so how many borrowers do you have now?
We're adding about $1 million a day right now.
Let's start this. When did you first start taking deposits?
July 1st. We launched.
7 months ago,
yes.
8 months ago.
We've not advertised anything. You're not going to find any ads, Celsius ads anywhere. So it's all organic.
All word of mouth, yeah.
All word of mouth. And again, we put pretty high barriers. If you download the app and try it, you will see it's not easy. It asks you for your social security. It's asking you for your driving license. It's breaking every rule about mass adoption. Right? It's basically doing the opposite of what you should do if you want to get a few 100 million users. But I learned a big lesson from Facebook because I invested in different social media companies, and when I saw Facebook in the early days, 2004, 2005, I was like, looking at this saying, they have no chance. I mean, this will never happen. By the way, I said the same thing about Google. So whatever I say no to, you should invest immediately. But the point is that the beautiful things that Facebook did that most people underestimate is that from day one, by default, they only allowed real identities on. So when Mark Zuckerberg stole all the photos of all of his classmates in Harvard and posted them, he posted the real names next to it. You couldn't come to Facebook and create a fake identity like you did with MySpace and everywhere else.
Sure.
And because of that seed germinating with real identities, the whole propagation was with real identities. And all the connections were real. And all the referrals were real. And all the photos were real and so on. So he created the first network on the internet where, until the Russians showed up, was all real identities. Right?
Right.
And he had hundreds of millions of people who were real people, right? And that's what we need here. If you want to do VOIP, you need real identities. You need real people. If I'm paying you, I need to make sure that it's you on the other side and not some scammer stealing the money because he knows that I'm about to pay you and he can pretend to be you and steal your capital.
So one of your objects that you're trying to achieve is to help the unbanked. Having these high barriers doesn't help them. Or how does that help them?
Yes. So most of the people on the planet do not have a digital identity. So obviously, putting a requirement for a digital identity is an impossible barrier. Unbanking yourself doesn't mean we focus on the unbanks. Unbanking yourself, which is our
it's
slogan,
just moving away from the banks.
Means that if we want the value to be given to the depositors and not to the shareholders, we need to take the capital from the banks and move it to an organization that acts in your best interest. You, the depositor. Right? So that's how you unbank yourself. So
I got it. So that's the terminology, how you're using it.
Now the VOIP is used by 3.5 billion people. That is my bar now. I have to
exceed
that. So the bar is very, very high. I'm in every speech I talk about the next 100 million people to join crypto. But that's just the first step. That's like the minimum necessary critical step just for us to survive. If we don't have 100 million users, the whole infrastructure created on the blockchain will collapse and die off. Because technology
from a crypto standpoint.
From a blockchain standpoint. Because
really? You think that blockchain won't? I mean, public networks
I'm talking about public networks,
right?
Not private networks.
Okay.
So the public network, the public blockchain network, requires critical mass of adoption because the cost of operating Ethereum is several $billions today. So you cannot sustain that unless there's enough economic activity on the network. And you're not going to have enough economic activity on the network if you don't have enough use cases and you don't have enough users.
Right.
So the reason the dollar is the most powerful currency on the planet, and the U.S. is the U.S. holds the reserve currency on the world, is because everything is denominated and transacted in dollars.
Right.
So we, the American society, gets to benefit from the fact that every oil producer and every gas producer and every gold producer,
all the commodities,
or chicken grower anywhere on the planet effectively prices that product in dollars, and we get this free subsidy, which we abuse tremendously, right? I mean, the U.S. government, unfortunately, abuses its power, takes it for granted, abuses the dollar, right? That's what I'm talking about. The power of the dollar, because the power of America as an empire is the dollar.
Right.
The military is here to protect the dollar, not the other way around. So the fight is between a decentralized currency that is deflationary, like the Bitcoin, and a centralized inflationary currency. It's a fight between Keynesian economics and Austrian economics.
Right.
So decentralization is here to basically wash the planet with Austrian economics and say all of this inflationary fake currency and debt that you created will collapse on itself
eventually,
because it's unsustainable.
Right.
Now, we don't know if it's going to happen 5 years from now or 50 years from now, but it's just unsustainable to reflate yourself out of trouble and assume that just because you used this bazooka 3 times before, it's going to work the next time.
Right.
We know it's not going to work if we had $1 trillion worth of debt.
Right. Well, you know, we read all the time that central banks, they say that they have no more bullets in it or no more arrows to actually shoot.
Yes.
They've been using them all.
They're using them all every time. Yes. So.
Okay.
So I think the opportunity here is really to create a new economic system, again, based on decentralization, based on deflationary currencies, in which the decentralized organization is acting in the interest of its holders. Again, the U.S. government, unfortunately, is not acting in the interest of the people holding the dollars.
Right.
Right? The Fed is here to protect the dollar, not to protect the holder of the dollar. And that is what most people don't understand. So the opportunity for the Bitcoin, for Ethereum, for any other coin to come after it is to create a system for the vast majority of the people on this planet in which they can trust a trustless network that is acting in their best interest.
Okay, so coming back to Celsius, you have Celsius Pay. Is that the application?
So CellPay is trying to bridge...
CellPay, right.
Yeah, CellPay is trying to bridge the gap of adoption. So it's basically saying, today, if I am interested in sending you coins, I have to know that, for example, you even know what Bitcoin is.
Right.
I have to call you and ask you for your wallet address. I have to send you a test transaction. I have to call you again and say, did you get the test transaction? Then send you the full transaction, call you again and see if you got the full transaction. That's 7 or 8 unnecessary steps.
Right.
Imagine every time I had to send an email, I had to do the same thing.
It'd be impossible.
It would be impossible. So we created a simple app, a function in our Celsius network app, in which you can send anyone on the planet any currency that you want, Bitcoin, Ethereum, or stablecoin, and you don't need to know their wallet address. You just need to know their phone number or their email, or
because you're using a smart app.
We're using any of the existing, like WhatsApp. We use email. We use SMS. Any of the existing networks to create the transaction, but keep that payment in a safe place and onboard the customer and create a wallet for them with an address. They can always withdraw it and use it somewhere else.
Sure.
But we're basically wasting resources by creating wallets for everyone, but we're solving the problem of mass adoption by effectively eliminating the need of people to know what's a private address, a private key, how do I onboard, what does it work. So if there's money waiting for you, you're going to take all those steps.
Okay, so now you've got the depositors. They're making deposits to it. Now the opposite side of that coin is what about the borrowers? Who are the borrowers and how many borrowers do you have? I mean, I read on your website that you have the largest loan based?
Single loan. Yes.
Single loan. 5.7 million?
5 million. Yes.
5 million.
It's a round number. Yeah. So that was just an individual that came in and said, "I'll give you 10 million of Bitcoin. Will you give me a $5 million loan against my Bitcoin?" And we said, "Sure, we'll do that." So we've done, believe it or not, over 72,000 loans in the first 6 months of.
And what's the average term of these loans?
In the last 6 months of 2018.
Oh,
Since July 1st.
Well, that's when you launched.
End of December, exactly. And the reason the number is so great is because most of our loans are API based,
right? Where
we work with exchanges and institutions to quickly trade. These are coin loans; they're not dollar loans.
Right.
We've done, many dollar loans as well, but most of those are big tickets. Our smallest loan, I think, is $5,000 right now.
Okay.
So we're not ready to do the $100 loan or the $50 loan.
Right.
But that's coming, and again, that's when we go into kind of open this up to the rest of the world.
Well, so what is the roadmap that you have? I mean, you've been effectively running this for the last 7-8 months. Obviously, you're working through some of the structural issues. Now, what is the roadmap for 2019, 2020?
So currently, we're only really, even though we have depositors from over 100 countries, we're really focused on the English-speaking language. Our website is only in English, right? So what we're trying to do is really kind of basically finish the product. I can tell you that our entire team is working every day on bugs and fixes and legal requirements and compliance and all kind of other things that are all here to make the product work the way it's supposed to work. Make sure that we can lend everywhere legally. Make sure that we can collect. Make sure that we have all the functionality that is necessary, and then we can lower the minimum. So, for example, the loan amounts, we don't have a minimum amount for deposit. Right. You can deposit 1 Satoshi. But on the loan amount, we capped it. We made the minimum $5,000 just to make sure that we're not flooded with thousands of applications that our small team can't process. So the plan after that is to basically expand and support many other languages, so people can onboard in their native language.
So what are the languages you're going to?
So we are launching in Brazil, for example. So we're going to have Portuguese.
Sure.
We have a partner bank in Brazil that's launching. We're going to have probably either Chinese or either Mandarin or a few other languages.
Sure.
Currently, Japan is a problematic country from a regulatory standpoint. Their requirements for crypto are almost the same as if you own the full banking license.
Wow.
So there are only 15 licenses that have been issued to date, and it's the same license to operate a full exchange as it is to just take a deposit. So basically you are, the bar is very, very high. For Japan, and we probably, even though we have a lot of people in our ICO, we had a lot of Japanese participation. So we had 1,500 people who came in and said, "Alex, we really want you to build this. We read your white paper. We want you to build this. This is really, if you build this, it will be an amazing achievement for the society, for the community." Because we didn't take any money from VCs or from, so all these companies you read before, that you mentioned, I raised over $1 billion for all these companies from venture capitalists, from in an IPO, in all kind of other mechanisms, debt and equity and you name it, right? I've been touring Wall Street for the last 30 years collecting capital. And Celsius is the first company in which we're creating it for the people and it's funded by the people. We did not take a single dollar from, I don't think we took a single dollar from any VC or any kind of a crypto fund or anything like that. Not that I know of, you know. And the reason for that is because when you're building for the people, those guys, the investors, have completely different interests. Their interests are not aligned with our depositor community.
Correct.
So that's basically brings you full circle into what, how, and why.
So you just mentioned your team. Can you tell us a little bit about your team?
Sure. So few of my teammates I've worked with before, and many of them are just hardcore crypto community enthusiasts. Some of them I met at meetups. Some of them were just in our community and they were working so hard. We said, "Hey, we have to pay you. You're doing all this stuff for free." Like one of our guys, Dax, he's out of Amsterdam, and he was like, he works around the clock, and we're like, I went to see him. I stayed in his houseboat in Amsterdam, and he's the hardest working guy I know. Like, he makes me look bad, So we just put him on the payroll because it was like embarrassing that he's doing all this work for the community and he's not getting paid for it. So we have a very dedicated team. We have a small team. I mean, we have 22 programmers and about 17 full-time employees.
Sure.
Like Salt, one of our competitors, over 100 employees, right? And they're doing a fraction of the volume that we're doing because, again, they're not doing it for the community, right? They're doing it for profit maximization, which is fine for their investors. It's just not what the community needs. So I think, could we have built a profitable business here? Of course. We could have done all the things we're doing and extracted most of the value for ourselves and our investors. But I think when you look back, when you're going to be on your deathbed and you look at what you achieve in your life, you're going to look and say, look at what I've built and what survived me, right?
Of course,
and
of
is
course.
it doing good? Or did I die with all these dollars? I have more dollars and more toys than anyone else. I'm going to heaven or hell, wherever you're going, with more toys. Exactly. So I don't think the competition is about how many of these fake dollars you can accumulate.
Right.
That is just silly.
Now, one of the things, just full disclosure, I've actually met you previously. We were on a panel at a conference. And prior to that, going up onto that panel, we had the opportunity to talk about one of your advisors. And so you have one particular advisor who is really more instrumental towards the blockchain community than any others.
Well, I was reading Satoshi's paper and I got to the last page and I looked at the reference page and I saw that 4 out of the 7 references.
No, there's 8.
There's 8.
Right.
Okay, so 4 out of the 8 refer to Scott Stornetta. I was like, who is this Scott Stornetta guy? So I looked him up on LinkedIn and I looked up his paper that he published in 1991. And I'm like, God, this guy invented the blockchain.
Right.
Belcore 1991. And Satoshi's talking about him, referring to him again and again and again, saying, hey, here is where I got my ideas. Here is who created this in the first place and so on. And I reached out to Scott and he's like, look, I don't endorse ICOs. I don't get involved. They called me from the Blockchain Society. They called me from the Ethereum Foundation. I don't do any of these things.
Right.
And I'm like, but Scott, let me just explain to you what we do. And maybe you'll decide that this is the application that you need to get involved in.
Right.
Because you created this thing 30 years ago, right? And it's overdue for you to become an overnight success, right?
Right.
You waited 30 years.
Well, at least the acknowledgement.
Or at least the acknowledgement. No, but Scott is he's been thinking about it for 30 years. So everything we're thinking about every day is not new to him. He already had that thought. And he already came to the conclusion that it's right or wrong or there's a better way to do it. So I met Scott a few times and we had a few discussions and we kind of, I think, figured out that we both have the same kind of mission in life. And he comes at it from maybe a different angle. I'm more of the public speaking and evangelist, and I run around and carry the flag and push as hard as I can. He's not that kind of guy, right? He's more of a subdued and collected and cerebral thinker.
Right.
But that's why we make a great team. And he agreed to join us as an advisor, and he's been very instrumental in helping us, reminding us of why we're doing what we're doing, and helping us make decisions. And I'm very proud that he's part of the team and that he's helping us achieve our goals.
Well, one of the best stories you shared with me about him is that you have sometimes spoken and you've put his picture up and said, does anyone know who this person is?
No one
and
does.
No one's everyone's clueless about it.
He's in my stand-up presentations, so almost every time, I've done over 100 of them, almost every time I present, I show his picture and no one has a clue who he is, and there was a conference, I think it was in Vegas, because I put his picture and page number 9, Satoshi's page number 9 with all the references, and they say, here are the references, and here's the guy of the references. And so a guy in the crowd said, bullshit, I don't believe you made this thing up. And I'm like, look, it's public information. People are so skeptical these days. It's just horrible, so.
Well, that's great.
Yes.
I want to thank you for appearing here on the Blockchain 360 podcast. It's been a pleasure to actually speak with you. Thank you for taking some time. Just as a side note for listeners, I'm actually interviewing Scott Stornetta this Friday.
Excellent.
And so he's going to be the podcast right after you.
Excellent. Good. I'll be the opening act for Scott.
That's it.
So that's good. That's good. But so just a call to action to your listeners, right? If you believe in anything about the blockchain or decentralization, and you think that this is really here to help people, then you need to help with adoption. Right? And it doesn't matter if you're using Celsius or some other service or whatever, but you need to take action and onboard at least 10 of your friends to just bring them in. This is not about them investing their life savings or anything like that. This is about each one of these people putting $10 and buying this or that coin and just understanding it and sending it to someone else. That's the key issue.
Right. You have to be able to use it.
Exactly. When they realize how easy it is to transact with anyone on the planet at no cost, and bypass the banks and the financial institutions that dominate our lives, then they will understand the whole purpose of this thing. Because, when you read about it in an article or when you hear about it in a cocktail party, it's not the same as actually sending it to someone who can actually benefit from it.
That's true. Well, I want to thank you once again for appearing here on Blockchain 360 podcast.
The Blockchain 360 podcast is produced weekly. Have a question? Want us to interview someone specific? Wish to hear about a particular topic? Let us know. You can email podcast@blockchain360.co or tweet us on Twitter @blockchain360 or at our website blockchain360.co.